In writing, most often the distinction between fiction and non-fiction is made very clear. But what happens when your source material is that lived experience? And to what degree is that the case for fiction writers? This week, that line is a little less distinct for our featured writer, who is Raoul de Jong from Suriname and The Netherlands. He is a novelist, essayist, journalist, and his 2020 collection, Jaguarman, looks at and does a kind of rewriting of the Surinamese history. It also looks into his lineage, familiar lineage, and we see how Raoul uses that real life experience and charts it into fiction. So we spoke to him. I spoke to him while in Iowa City. He is a fellow of the University of Iowa's International Writing Program. So I was able to talk to him during our fellowship to get a bit into what both that process has been like and what it means for him to be navigating that real history and to be rewriting, if you will, rewriting and charting a new kind of history when he goes to his text. He is the author of 5 collections of stories and also 4 novels, including Jaguarman and others. And we look forward to hearing what he has to say about that journey and hearing him read a bit from Jaguarman during the course of this episode. It is episode 8, so we do want to remind you that you can watch our other episodes. Episode 7 just premiered, and that gives a bit of background into the Ackee Pod and the conceptualization of this interview series. So go ahead and check out episode 7 and check out our other episodes on the channel Wild Current Studios on YouTube, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at Wild Current Studios to get all the updates and to see what else we have in store. As always, I'm Yashika Graham, welcoming you to another episode of the Ackee Pod, interviews with writers.
My name is Raoul de Jong and I'm from the Netherlands and Suriname.
How did you become a writer, of all things?
I became a writer, I don't know, I started to write when I was 12 years old for the first time. And it was because I had read a diary of Anne Frank, we say, like this Jewish girl that was that kept a diary during the Second World War, and I had read her diary, and then I felt like, oh wow, I also want to have a diary. So I started the diary, yeah, and I kept on doing that, and that sort of turned later on into me being a writer. Yeah, professionally, no, I have to say, like, when I started this diary, I sort of understood it was a way of like communicating with life itself, and it was a way to take control of life and to send life into a certain direction, maybe just because by writing about life you look in a different way at life, but then also life reacts to that. Yeah, and I understood that by writing about life you could turn your life into a beautiful story. Yeah, so that is something that I always kept on doing. And then when I was 18, I finished my high school, and many things went very wrong at that moment. I didn't live with my mother anymore. And basically by the time I had my diploma from high school, I didn't have a house, I didn't have a job, I didn't really have an idea what to do with my life or with my future, but I did have a computer, so I just started to write everything that was happening to me down, and by the end of that year I had a book and it was published, and yeah, because it got published I could do all these other things that I always dreamt of as a child by writing about it.
So, what role has the lived experience played in your writing?
So, yeah, most of my books are about my lived experience, actually. Actually, all my books are about my lived experience, and quite directly. Yeah, I usually yeah, how do you say? Well, when I was 21, for example, I went to New York with only $50, and I had to survive there for 3 months. And that was not really planned like that. I just really had $50 by the time I arrived in New York. But for the book it was very good, because it turned everything into a very interesting story, and the only thing I had to do was write down what was happening. Yeah, and again, it sort of protected me from, well, like if bad things were going to happen, that could still be good for the book. So it didn't really matter what was going to happen. Everything was interesting because I had arrived there with only $50, and that was an accident. But then later I understood, oh, that is something that you can actually also plan. So, like 3 books later, for example, I wrote a book after I had a dream, after my dog died. And in this dream I sort of heard you have to walk to Marseille, the south of France, where my mother lived, which is 1,000 kilometers from where I live in Holland. So then I decided, okay, I will do that. I will just close the door behind me and I will just start to walk, and I will write down everything, because everything that's going to happen will be an amazing story. Yeah, so I kind of turned my life into a story, and then I write down what happens. Yeah.
Which writers have been important for you on your journey as a writer yourself? Who have you read over this time?
Okay, well, there are many writers that have been very important for me. I've always read when I was very young already. I always read. Hey, yeah, please walk on. Yeah, so there have always been writers that were important to me, but okay, what do I have to say? Well, like for example, when I walked to Marseille after I had a dream, that was also because I had read a book by a guy that in 1976 had walked from one side of America to the other side of America together with his dog. And I had read that book, and I thought that book was so beautiful, and I had read that book right after my dog died. And while reading that book, I thought, oh, this was exactly what I would have liked to do with my dog. And because I read that book, I understood, oh, it is possible. You can do that. You can walk from one side of America to the other side of America, and good things will happen. Yeah, so it was really because of that book also that I wrote a book in which I walked 1,000 kilometers. No, but what was always said about me and about the way I am in this life, in Holland they always said a little bit about me, oh, that I was very naive and a bit childish, and like, yeah, that life is not made, for example, to take your dreams seriously and then actually live them out. And I always felt a little bit alone in that until I met my father, who comes from Suriname. And my father looks a lot like me, and he talks the same and he moves the same. And because we look so much like each other, I became interested in the country where he is born, which is Suriname, and about the history of Suriname. I wanted to know what was the history of that country. Why do I know so little about it? So one day I went to the bookstore and I asked for books about Suriname that were written by people that looked like me and like my father. And in the bookstore they said they don't exist, these kind of books. And then I went on the internet, kept on searching for a very long time, and then of course these books actually do exist. I found a book from 1934, which is translated now to English, We Slaves of Suriname by Anton de Kom. That book was forbidden when it came out. And yeah, it talks about the history of Suriname from the perspective of people that were enslaved. And I kept on searching and I found many books like this, not only from Suriname writers, but also from writers from Jamaica, for example, Claude McKay, who's one of my very favorite writers. He wrote books at the end of the 20s, beginning of the 30s. Zora Neale Hurston from America, the Harlem Renaissance. And the funny thing was that in these books, I recognized myself. And I found voices that said, actually, the way you are in life is not naive. It's the contrary. It's actually the solution. Yeah, we are made to follow our dreams, to take them seriously. It's not naive at all. It's exactly why you have dreams, to take them seriously, because there's something that wants well for you, and it's good to listen to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You've been writing for a long time. What surprises you even today about the process of writing or the writing that you end up producing?
Okay, what surprises me, I think, well, that with writing you really can change the world a little bit, not only for yourself, but also, yeah, for other people. Like, yeah, you can influence how other people look at the world around them, and like that make their lives actually a little bit better. Yeah, so my last book is called Jaguarman, and it talks about the history of Suriname. I worked on that book for 7 years, and I get like emails from people very often that thank me for that book, and that say who say that book really touched them and changed their life and brought them in contact with their ancestors and or their parents, and yeah, so that, I mean, I kind of, that is why I do it, but it always surprises me when it actually happens. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes.
Talk a little bit for me, if you will, about Jaguarman and the importance of lineage in that book.
Yeah. Okay, so Jaguarman is a book about basically the history of Suriname. Suriname is this small former colony of Holland, of the Netherlands. It's basically a piece of Amazon rainforest that the Dutch once traded with the English for New Amsterdam, which then would become New York. People were living there when it was discovered by the English. They were the first that came there, I think. These people that were living there were sort of slaughtered, and they escaped into the rainforest. Then the Dutch, French, German, English, Spanish, they all came to Suriname. They brought people from Africa to work on plantations as slaves. Yeah, so that's basically the history of Suriname. And they don't teach you this history in Holland. As a Dutch person, you don't know anything about Suriname. Yeah, and that was the first thing that surprised me when I finally did discover this history, is that it is the history of Holland, and you cannot understand what Holland is and in what kind of world we live if you don't know that history. Yeah, so they worked very hard to keep that history hidden and to keep everybody that wrote about that history silent. So what I tried to do in my book was well, first what I tried to do in reality was discover all these voices from native people in Suriname, voices from enslaved people. I tried to find these voices, and I found them, and then I tried to write a book in which I basically created a temple for all these voices, and I used all these voices to write a new version of history in which these people were not the victims but the heroes, in which my ancestors were not the victims but the heroes. And in order to do that, you have to go to the darkness, because the history has been very terrible for people who look like me. But I always thought, but I am alive, and that means that somehow people found a way to survive all of this. So there must be, besides the darkness, there must be also a very huge light in this history, and that is what I kept on searching for, and I didn't give up until I knew what it was and knew how to share it with other people.
That was beautiful.
Yeah? Okay.
Any closing thoughts?
Any closing thoughts?
On writing, or on any project, or what is moving you at this time?
Okay. Okay, what is moving me at this time is that we're in Iowa City. We're at the end of the Iowa International Writers Program of the University of Iowa. In the last 2 months I have been sharing day and night with other writers from all around the world, one of them being you. And writing is a very lonely process. Not only the writing itself, but also like after your, or at least in my case, after my last book came out, I felt very alone oftentimes in defending that book and defending that story and defending all the people that I was writing that book for. And what was very beautiful about the last 2 months is that I was not alone. I was with people that are like me and that also know this story. And that write. And for writing is really a struggle also. Many of the people that we were with, actually, they really, it was dangerous sometimes to use their voice, but they did it anyway. And that brought them here, and it was just very beautiful to be with all these people.
Dear thou, who art my forefather, for this past few years you've been playing a game with me. You gave me clues and I followed them, from Rotterdam, where I live in the Netherlands, to Paramaribo, the capital of Suriname, from Rome to Recife. But every time I was about to step on your tail, you sped away. We cannot go on like this forever, I think you know that as well as I do. It's time to take stock of how far we've come. It's time to put our cards on the table. Alright, I will begin. This is not a story about white or black or the Netherlands or Suriname, and it's also not a story about my father, even though all those things play a role. This is a story about you. I'm told that you had supernatural powers, and that those powers have something to do with me. Is that possible? Just because we share a few genes, could your actions have influenced my life? When I look at my father and myself, I think, yes, they must have. For 28 years, he wasn't a father to me, yet we share everything, much more than just our outward appearance. So it stands to reason there's also something of my father's father in me, and of my father's father's father. And all those fathers lead me back to you. My father tells me you had the power to change yourself into a jaguar, king of the Amazon, the strongest, and some say the cruelest, animal of the South American rainforest. How did you do that? Who were you? Where did you get your powers from? And why does my father tell me I should leave these powers alone?
And that's what we have for this episode of the Ackee Pod. Big thanks to our featured writer this week, Raoul de Jong, for talking to us and getting us a bit into the world of his work as a writer and a person in the world. You know, what that journey has been like for him. Be sure to check out his novel, Jaguarman, and join us again right here at the Ackee Pod for another episode when we come back on Monday. Yes. Join us at Wild Current Studios, that's our channel, and also follow us on Instagram for all the details, all the updates, and excerpts from our episodes. I'm Yashika Graham for the Ackee Pod, interviews with writers.